My name is Vicenti, and previously I've been on the React Native team at Facebook, and I've worked on a handful of React Native apps at Facebook. But I come from a web development background, and I got started with React many years ago before React Native was a thing. So I'm very much with you guys in the web development mindset, and I'm really excited to sort of get back into the full stack context. And I've been working on the React Navigation project for a while now, and I'm going to go into a little bit about the history of the React Navigation project and mostly how we can reconcile it with what navigation means on web. So we're going to have to sort of break down our concept of navigation state and build it back up again if we're going to really get a good grasp of what we're doing here. So hands up if you've used React Router a little bit on web. Tons of people, like basically the whole room just raised their hands. This is awesome because now everyone knows exactly what's going on in this slide. We're basically rendering, this is just a React Router, we're rendering a router, we're defining two different routes, and for each of these different routes we're going to be switching between the screen component for the home path and for the search path. So if you kind of conceptually break down what React Router is doing here, it's kind of acting like an if statement, right? Well, let's actually take a quick look at what it looks like inside of a web browser. This is on the mobile web. We're going to basically be going between a few different screens. And you'll notice, I'm sure as a lot of the web developers in the room are familiar, the entire navigation state is basically available in the URL. You can copy and paste the URL to other places. And if you're switching between different tabs inside of this website, your state inside of each of those tabs is going to get entirely reset. So in the case of a website, you can kind of think of your app, your top-level app component, as taking a prop, like a navigation state prop. And in this case, we're going to be passing down the URL into your app. And that's going to basically be your navigation state. Right? The whole navigation state is the URL. Now, the browser does store a stack of URLs. You know, as Brent was just talking about the React Navigation stack, the browser does the exact same thing. But your app has limited access to this stack, so we can't quite assume full control of it. And on React Native, your app clearly still has navigation state, but it's not exactly clear what it is. It's hard to imagine what the URL of your app would actually be, what the full navigation state of your app is going to be. So let's take a closer look at what that might be. I've got a video here of the podcast app on iOS. And here we're going to sort of navigate inside of one tab. We're in the Listen tab, which is the first tab. We'll do some navigation. And then we're going to switch tabs. And when we get back to the Listen tab, you'll notice that the state for it is completely preserved. So this is just the expectation that users have on mobile apps. So let's take a look at what this state is going to be structured like. Right, we've got this mobile navigation state. In this case, we have two different routes, one for each tab. Actually, in this case, we're looking at a single stack. Excuse me, I misspoke. So in this stack, we have two different routes. First is kind of the index page of listing your different podcasts. And then when you tap into a podcast, you're looking at the podcast details. And in this case, we have some params on it. But keep in mind, this is just the navigation state of the first tab. And when you switch tabs, we need to retain this navigation state. So I'm going to pop it out a little bit, and we're going to show you what it's like to see the navigation state of the whole app. Right? So it's actually a nested structure. On the top level, we're structuring the navigation of the tabs, right? So there's the first tab, which in this case is a complete stack. And then the second tab is this search tab. And based on the index is kind of showing which is the active route. You can see that we're on the first tab, and inside of the first tab, we're on the second screen. We're on the details screen inside the first tab. So now we've got a clear understanding of what the navigation state could be. You know, when we jump to the search tab, we're going to change the index, but we're going to leave this first route intact. Now, trying to serialize this whole structure to a URL would be a little challenging. So are URLs relevant inside mobile apps? The short answer is yes. You can often launch a mobile app with a particular URL, and you expect that mobile app to be jumped deep inside of your app, we often refer to that as deep linking. And then also, while your app is running, the operating system or the browser might link to you, and you're going to be given an event, basically, from the OS that's saying, hey, we need you to open this URL. Go and open it. So in mobile apps, URLs are really more like actions that we can handle. And we're going to change our navigation state to take you to a certain place in the app in response to this action. OK, so if URLs are actions, then maybe we could use a reducer to define our navigation state. So that way, we can kind of have a conceptual model for what our navigation state is going to be on mobile apps and also on web. So in this case, we're defining a navigation reducer, and it's given access to the previous navigation state, which might be empty if the app is just launching. And it's getting a URL, which is like, what URL are we about to jump to in our application? And it's going to return the full new navigation state. So this is the navigation reducer for web apps. It's relatively straightforward because you're always going to be squashing the last state with the action. You're basically going to be saying that we're being told to open an action, we're being told to open a URL. So we're going to throw away the whole previous navigation state. You can see we're not even using this last state argument. And we're just returning the URL as the full navigation state. So this is pretty easy to understand. But on mobile apps, it's kind of contextual to the application. Right? Each application is going to want to have a different structure for its navigation state. So I brought up the concept of a reducer quite intentionally because here is a way that we can model what it's like when we're being told to launch with a particular URL. Here we're defining our application component. It's labeled app with navigation because it's smart and it's able to handle URLs. And at the very beginning, it's given a launch URL. In this case, it would sort of be available earlier in this module. And we're constructing the initial state for our app. And we're calling app.navigationReducer because the app itself is the only thing that knows the navigation state. The navigation reducer is a property of the app because it's sort of describing what the navigation state is going to be for this particular app. In the case of the podcast app, you saw that we had that nested structure, but other apps might even have a deeper nested structure. And at the top level, we have no idea how to handle that. So we can call into the navigation reducer to determine the navigation state, and then we'll just pass that into the app. OK, so in the case when we're told to open a URL, like from the operating system, and we get that event, we can go ahead and call this function. We're given the URL. We can call, again, we'll call the app, the navigation reducer that's associated with the app. We have the previous state. In this case, we're using the transactional setState API, where we're defining a function where we can map from the last state to the new state. So we're passing it through the navigation reducer, and we're using this URL as the action for our reducer, because the navigation state is basically going to change such that the screen signified by this URL is now active. OK, so the fun thing is that web apps can also support this deep, complicated navigation state. And we're all going to have some fun today playing with it. And the only trick is that you need to remap your understanding of URLs. Instead of thinking of it as a navigation state, you can think of it as an action. OK, so it's basically time to jump into a demo. This is going to get pretty fun because we're demoing some brand new stuff that we haven't talked about or even really debugged very much. So we'll have some fun and maybe run into some fun bugs that you can help me fix. Cool. So I'm going to jump over to my terminal, make this a little bit legible for you. And I'm going to show you a fun new way to start a web app. And we're going to be using create React native app. And I'm going to be calling npx, which is going to just install create React native app. And we're going to be creating a React native app called Boston. And we're using this sort of experimental flag called with web support. And what this is going to do is it's going to use a project called React Native Web to basically give us the React Native API inside of a web browser. We're specifying a certain scripts version because this is highly experimental stuff. This was just released today. All right, we're still cleaning up some of the final aspects of this installation. But the fun thing is inside of your Create React Native app, of course, you can run it as a React Native app, but you can also run web, literally. So I'm going to go cd into Boston. Thanks for hosting at Car Guru. This is a very exciting opportunity. So we're going to cd into Boston, and I'm going to go yarn web. Actually, it says yarn start, but that's if you're treating it like a React Native app. I'm just going to start it as the web app. Okay, it says Webpack has started successfully. I'm going to jump into the web browser and run it. Okay, so let's take a look at the source code for this. I mean, it's running as a web app, but the fun thing is that this is actually a React Native code base. Open up source/app.js, and here you can see we're importing React Native primitives from the React Native package. And on web, this is actually, we're using a Webpack trick to secretly refer to React Native Web. And that's how this is working. So view is literally being rendered as a div, and texts are often rendered as spans. So I'm going to change this code a little bit, jump to the web browser. It's live reloading. That's fun. OK, so I'm going to go ahead and paste in a little bit of navigation code to get us going. But first, I'm going to go ahead and yarn add React Navigation and this brand new, highly experimental React Navigation web. Going to paste those in here to my terminal. And let's take a look at the next chunk of code. So we're going to skip that for just a second. So you saw earlier that there is Create Stack Navigator, but there's also something called Create Bottom Tab Navigator that we have inside of React Navigation. I'm going to quickly copy and paste this over to the real code. Oops, I don't want to squash all of these imports. Okay. So we've gone and done that. I'm going to refresh this. Nothing's showing up. I'm sure we've got lots of errors in the console. I told you we'd run into bugs. This is one that I expected. There's an error in our home screen component. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on. So the home screen is extending from React.component. It's just a normal view with text inside of it. Oh, it's referring to styles.container, which I totally clobbered a second ago. So I'm going to undo a few things. And instead of clobbering everything, I'm just going to clobber this. OK. So here you can see we're creating a bottom tab navigator. But we could actually create different types of navigators here. This is just kind of a fun hello world example. And this is our higher order component, and we're just exporting the app component as our top level component. I'm going to give this a reload. OK, and it's rendering our home screen, and it's allowing us to switch between our home screen and the podcast screen. OK, this is kind of nice. It's a very simple React Navigation app that we're running inside of the web browser. And it's using literally all of the React Navigation code that runs on React Native. So there's total code sharing, which is pretty cool. But there's kind of a side effect, right? Like if I jump into the podcast screen and I copy and paste my URL, we're back on the home screen. So this basic web behavior that we used to have is lost, which is pretty sad. So that's what this React Navigation web project is for. It's basically allowing your React Navigation app to talk to the web browser in a more standard way, such that we can sync your URLs to your navigation state. So a lot of this stuff works out of the box, but behind the scenes it works exactly how I was describing earlier with a router defining the navigation state. So let's jump into, I'm going to copy and paste this little snippet, which is going to be just using React Navigation Web. It's very simple. This project is only like 50 lines of code. And I'm going to have to do that in the index.js file, because this is the file that's like web specific in the project. This is a special aspect about the way that we created our React Native app. It's because we use the with web support flag. That's why we have this file available to us. So the only difference here is you can see I'm wrapping our app component with create browser app, and I'm just going to go ahead and render the browser app rather than rendering the actual React Native app. So this is going to do some sort of smart wrapping, and the idea is it's going to give us the same behavior, but it's going to keep the URL in sync. So now our URL is updating. And when we refresh, well, it was actually quite fast. It keeps us on the same screen. I don't even know why it should have flashed, but it's working. So we're refreshing on the podcast screen. Now these URLs are basically just named after the route names that we had registered in our navigator here. So we can actually go ahead and extend this a little bit. Let's go ahead and make it so the home screen is literally the home screen. So this is the route name here that we're defining, but we can also define a screen component. And the screen component is actually also called home screen. You can see we define it up here. Now let's also set a path. And in this case, I'm just going to say that the path is empty string. And that basically means that when we, let's refresh. When we navigate to the home screen, it navigates us to an empty path. But we can still navigate to the podcast screen and refresh and whatnot. Okay, so this is pretty fun. This is using create bottom tab navigator, which includes both the navigation logic and also the view, right? So that's what's rendering these buttons down here. Now, if we want to reuse the navigation logic but switch to a different view, the easiest thing to do is actually to just use a different navigator. So there's some new ones. So there's create bottom tab navigator, but there's also create material bottom tab navigator. Let's refresh. Oh, it's not rendering super great right here, but this is literally the React Native code that typically renders the bottom tab navigation. So if you guys are curious, we'll be able to go into, I can show you how you might want to override these views that are being rendered. But for now, let's just go ahead and make our podcast app a little bit more complicated. I'm going to copy and paste a little bit more of a fun example. It still is pretty bare bones as far as the aesthetics go, so my apologies for that. It's because we've just been hacking on this stuff right now. I'm going to copy and paste it, but don't worry, I'll explain it step by step. So let's take a look at what we're doing now. Oops. So you can see we've got tabs. The reason I said oops is because these icons are horribly mangled, but don't worry, we'll fix that. Let's take a look at what we're actually doing inside of this, inside of our new app. So we're creating a stack navigator. Now you remember earlier when Brent was describing the stack navigation, it's basically allowing you to have several screens that are sliding on top of each other. And we've also got some simple things like a home screen with a title on it. You could also set this as a header title. Now, it doesn't work yet, but it's going to be pretty straightforward for us to add support such that this actually configures your browser title as well. Because the whole idea is that you want to be able to statically describe various aspects about your screen, and then we're going to be able to keep your app up to date no matter what. Okay, so let's take a look at the first tab, which is the main tab. As you can see, we've got this similar behavior where we're registering a route called home for a first tab inside of our app navigator with the empty path, right? And the main tab has two screens inside of it. It has a home screen. That's what we're seeing right here. So let's take a look at the implementation of home screen really quickly. It says My Podcast at the top. And it has a button where we're calling this.props.navigation.navigate. And we're passing a param, not a very useful one, I'll admit, but we're passing a param nonetheless that we'll be able to access from our next screen, from the channel route. Okay, and this home screen is registered inside of the stack. And because it's registered inside of the stack and we're linking to something else inside of the stack, when we call navigate, or when we press this button, we're going to do a stack navigation. And it looks a little bit funny on web because we're literally using the exact same animation that we have on React Native. And the back button, in this case, is implemented with go back. So if we press the back button, it animates us back. Oops. I don't know why that wasn't working, but it seems to be working now. Okay, and we also have, built-in things that came with the mobile implementation of React Navigation, like this header. Allows us to go back. There's this back button right here, but there's also this other back button right here. Maybe that one will work. So it ties everything together with the browser navigation state. The forward button is working as well. It literally animates forward. And there's nothing very magical happening here. It's mostly because the way that we built React Navigation such that we're declaratively describing what the navigation state is based on the actions and the URLs that we can navigate to. So let's try navigating to a different tab. I'm going to hit the Discover tab. You can see there's like this trailing slash because we're on the first screen of the Discover tab. And when we navigate inside the Discover tab, we're navigating in this extra deeper inside of our path. So the routers that are part of the navigators that we're building, they have the ability to convert a URL into a navigation action. And that navigation action just gets passed through the reducer as per usual. And the other fun trick is that whenever the navigation state changes, here I'm going to navigate to the search screen. When the navigation state changes, the routers also provide the ability to get the current URL for the navigation state. So all we're doing is we're observing that, hey, the internal navigation state has changed, and it's going to use the router to figure out what to update inside the URL bar. But then again, normal browser navigation continues to work. With a deep stack, even though we're navigating within two different levels of navigators inside of our app. So we can go ahead and play with this a little bit more. For example, I really do want to enhance these icons. So we can actually go ahead and do yarn add React Native vector icons. And I'm going to go ahead and do this part that's a little bit embarrassing and I don't think should be necessary, but we have to sort of load the font for the vector icon. That's why we're seeing those lovely looking boxes over there. I'm just going to paste that here inside of our index.js file. And my hope now is that these icons are going to render. With some patience. Yeah, if anyone has any help, that would also be appreciated. Well, I was just tinkering on this, earlier when we were walking into the meetup, so I'm not super surprised that it's falling down on me with everyone watching. Okay. I think the problem is the way that we're importing the path. I think what was happening here is we're accessing a relative path. So my guess is that it's only going to work if we load the app from root. So I'm going to save this and load the app again from root. And our icons are appearing. It's a little bit unfortunate that if we navigate into a tab and then refresh, the icons will disappear. But don't worry, we'll be able to fix that. So that's a pretty quick introduction of what it's like to use React Navigation on web. And I hope this helps break down your understanding of what navigation state really can be. It doesn't have to be a URL. And your navigation state could be a bigger tree that lets you support more complicated behaviors. I forgot to show you one really cool thing, one of the main reasons why this is important, that now you'll be able to take advantage of inside of web apps. Like, for example, we can navigate inside of a single tab. We've done a push inside of this tab, and we'll navigate to the Discover tab and then back, and the navigation state is preserved. Now, you won't usually notice this behavior on web apps, but it's something that we can pretty easily implement now that we have this concept of a deep navigation state. And we've been having a lot of fun messing around with React Native Web that lets us use these React Native components inside of the web browser. It's pretty exciting. But of course, we should probably try running this on React Native just because we built a mobile app just for fun here. So let's do yarn start. And it's going to open up Expo and launch the iOS simulator. And I promise it also works on Android. There's going to be a QR code that you can scan later if you don't believe me. I'm going to tap I to open up the iOS simulator. And the great thing is that we've already built URL support into this mobile app just by happenstance of supporting the web. So if we open up, so we will be able to deep link into this mobile app. It's not going to work entirely right now inside of Expo. But here, look, we've got our full app. We've got the Let's Go button. We can navigate forward. It looks a lot nicer on a mobile app, doesn't it? It's as if we designed it for this use case. Cool. So this is pretty much a quick demonstration of what it's like to use React navigation on both web and mobile. We're going to be continuing to hack on this, and I'll be posting a blog post about this before too long. So thanks for having me. And Brent, yeah.